there was a car stopped in the middle of the street, beeping at it, and it turned out to be a driverless Waymo car. These people were shouting at nobody.
Didn't want to do what my dad wanted me to do. It was just pure rebellion. Goofing around, doing shows in college. And the gateway drug was I became really good best buddies with a guy who dreamed about being a director.
What a wholesome rebellion. I
know. Yeah, exactly.
When other people's gateway drugs were drugs.
You're so busy.
Yeah.
You couldn't show up to a Zoom table read.
Yeah. You better be stuck in quicksand, hanging onto a vine, my friend. And I learned a lot from this one. Was for a show that I'd been cast in a small role. And I got through the table read and then was told the next day that my part had been cut.
Welcome, everyone. This is the first episode, The Actor's Guide to the End of the World. I'm your host, Econ Song, and this is my buddy, Rían Sheehy Kelly.
Hello.
We have new episodes every Monday, wherever you find your podcast, at Actor's Guide Podcast. We're on YouTube, we're on Substack, and follow us on all social media at Actor's Guide Podcast. And a quick word from our sponsor today. We're brought to you by Crocodile Tears Tear Stick.
When you're overjoyed with life and you absolutely have to cry.
We cry so you don't have to. All right. On the show today, we're talking more AI drama. What happens when your voice gets stolen by AI and you're not Scarlett Johansson? Rían and I share our acting origin stories. The state of Hollyweird today and ups and downs of recent table read experiences. And
what happens when you get a job and you get cut?
Ooh.
Yep.
What up, buddy?
How are you doing?
The show is on the road.
Are we recording?
Yeah.
Oh my God. Terrifying.
I know. It's all downhill from here.
100%.
So we're going to start out the show with what we call the word around town, which is the top headlines that we feel like actors need to know or we just feel are really interesting. So to start off, 2 actors getting their voices stolen by AI startups. And they've been making the rounds. New York Times did an interview on them. They're not Scarlett Johansson. We know what happened with her and OpenAI, but these 2 voiceover actors, Paul Lerman and Linnea Sage, they did jobs on Fiverr.
Yeah, I've heard about this.
So you heard of this, right?
Yeah.
Test scripts for radio ads. There was no indication that these jobs would be used for external use.
Oh,
and even,
interesting.
Yeah.
It just didn't say that they couldn't?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's bonkers.
When he asked what the voice sample was for, he was told it would be used for academic research purposes only. The scripts would not be used for anything else. He was paid $1,200 for the job. 2 years later, he came across a YouTube video that sounded as if it had his voice narrating it, although he'd never been involved in its creation. In 2023, Lerman claims he heard his voice being used on a podcast about the dangers of AI technologies.
Also, the account that solicited the job was user 2519987, so watch out for those bastards. The clue is in the name.
Oh, man.
It's the sort of disregard and the bullying tactics that they're like, well, fuck it, we're just going to do it anyway. You know what I mean? And at least we have, and this is not the case for the majority of actors, but at least we have the protection of the union. However, whatever flaws that has, at least we have that going for us. Whereas, you know, I think that a big danger is with non-union actors and non-union projects, which most of these things are, most of these AI projects are, I assume, because it's not in their interest for them to be union projects.
Yeah, exactly. This is where we are in the industry where we're just seeing it's just the wild, wild west.
And this, you know, goes beyond the story, but this is the sort of like whoever blinks first loses forever, like with automation. You know, yesterday I watched, there was a car stopped in the middle of the street and traffic was building up. People are getting angry and beeping at it and you shouting stuff. And it turned out to be a driverless Waymo car glitched out and gotten frozen as a car in front of it was parking. And these people were shouting at nobody. And like, it was so bizarre and surreal. There was no target for the anger. You know what I mean? It was like this sort of, once they figured out that there was nobody in this car, it just became this directionless rage.
I didn't realize there were driverless cars running around LA right now.
They freak me out. It's like the things that deliver the food. It's like the little
Right,
food
those little
robots.
buddies.
Every
Well,
time I
you probably
see one,
see
I
a
have
lot.
this urge to just smash them. And I know that there's a person on the other end of that camera watching me. So I'm like,
Yeah, that's true. You don't want to be caught on camera. Angry Irishman seen on camera smashing a little food robot.
no, seeing raging out on a tiny square box on wheels. Yeah, this is part of a very current, very important conversation.
But so next up, we were talking about this clip by one of the Emmy-winning creators of Hacks. Jen Statsky was on a podcast for WGA, and she was talking about how it's just really impossible to please studios right now because the stakes are so high. Everybody wants hits. That's basically the standard right now. And I think it's another indication of it's really tough to make good TV and really interesting things when you're not willing to take a risk. You know, ironically, it's Jeff Bezos, but he famously said when he does Amazon things, I think they tried to make a car, or actually it was probably the Amazon Fire Phone. He did the Amazon Fire Phone and it was a disaster. And he's on an earnings call. He had to talk about it. He goes, guys, if you think that was bad, we're going to make way worse things. It was a point of pride. And ironically, we're talking about a big studio because they also are one of the big tech players, but they are known for taking big risks. If it goes downhill, they tried, they'll move on to something else. Mm-hmm. And that's what a lot of innovation is. I mean, we really got spoiled the past, the golden era of TV.
So we have grown up in the era of like prestige television. But you forget that before that, 99 onwards, Sopranos started in, and even before that, like Oz made some noise. But right. The Sopranos, The West Wing, The Wire, mind-blowing stuff.
Great point. So David Chase created Sopranos, and he admitted there's no way that Sopranos would have got made after Sopranos. HBO would not take, when he made Sopranos, it was such a oddball, out of left field script, idea, concept. He didn't even, I mean, he was surprised that it even got picked up. But when HBO really, really started hitting it big with 6 Feet Under and started becoming what HBO was,
Deadwood.
He said they would never see him. They would never see him. He would never get in the door. So that goes to show you.
Isn't that interesting that like the thing that has worked for us in the past is now too risky to employ? That's a strategy that is now too risky because that's here now.
Yeah.
And that's why I admire anybody who takes risks, particularly after being successful, because that's the thing that gets you there. It's innovation, and it's not being afraid to fail. And, and it's a very easy thing to say that, and I understand on a bigger financial level, it's harder to take risks. So yeah, I mean, if that is Amazon's.
Well, I will clarify. Jeff Bezos said that as kind of like a mindset for the entire company, not specifically speaking of Amazon Studios.
Okay, right.
So if anything, Amazon Studios, you could guess that maybe it's a tax write-off. Apple TV obviously has a lot of great stuff, but most of their money is really coming from the products, computers, services, and all that stuff. So what made me think of that is now that you have tech companies taking over studios, this is what they're looking at. They're looking at profitability, successful earnings, and they're looking at the bottom line. They're not talking about art. They're not talking about great TV. And you see with HBO is when they Warner Brothers Discovery and the merger and everything else. There's there's been an influx of it's changed. The face of it has changed. I like to think that there's an upside to all this. It's easy to be like, hey, the industry's going to be dead in 3 years. Why bother? But if you really get out there, there's a lot of people who are still making things.
I see some people make stuff and they want it to bring them something, and that's fair. Yeah. Then there are people who are just making it because they enjoy it. But whatever the motivation behind it, like the people who are making things, I see them more and more because they are making things. Yeah. And I've been guilty of this in the past. I can sit back a little bit and wait. And I honestly think like waiting is the worst possible state you can be in because there's no power in it.
And also you might be able to foster the love and joy of actually doing something, like the practice and the diligence, and then making something better and better and better.
Right. Like, why did you start this in the first place? You know what I mean? I think of that sometimes. I'm like, why did I start? And I love it. Like, I absolutely love it. I love the collaboration. I love the process. When I get funneled into a trap of like, oh, it's slow or waiting for something to happen, like that's exactly when I need to rekindle that joy. But like, yeah, let's make something.
To be honest, I never thought about being an actor. I never thought about that as a way to get rich.
Yeah.
It's definitely a possibility, but that was never like the carrot at the end of the stick. You know what I mean?
Totally. And how did you, just briefly, like, you don't have to go into great detail, but how, like, what was the first thing? What was the thing where you went, yeah, this is it?
Didn't want to do what my dad wanted me to do. It was just pure rebellion.
Okay. That's it. It's a good start. Okay.
And other than that, it was, very typical Asian American experience. I did well in school. I played competitive tennis. I played competitive piano. I played classical piano. Didn't really foster any joy, but I did kind of grow this grit where I just practiced. I was very competitive. I felt some sense of self-identity out of it, but it was not me. I was just like a little robot.
Yeah.
And secretly, I knew that there was something emotionally that was missing from my life. I mean, let's be serious. How deep is a 16-year-old boy? You're not going to be terribly
you're
deep.
There. You're doing competitive piano. You know what I mean? You're crushing it.
Yeah. Exactly. So there was something underneath where I was like, there's something else out there, and eventually I'm going to figure it out. And my dad always wanted me to be a math professor like him, and I knew that was the last thing I was ever going to do.
Okay.
Went away to college. I started performing in shows where I was like secretly living out a small high school fantasy. And I was like, oh, it's all there. And the gateway drug was I became really good best buddies with a guy who dreamed about being a director.
Interesting.
He was my gateway drug, and we just geeked out. He was my entire film education.
What a wholesome rebellion.
I know. Yeah, exactly.
When other people's gateway drugs were drugs, you're like, I'm going to perform.
That's a really great point.
Outstanding. That's the modern day equivalent of running off to join the circus. Like, you're like, this is what I'm going to do. Oh, I love that.
Well, what about you? How early did it foster for you?
Not early, I had an idea in my head that I wanted to make films from a very young age, and I would make films with a camcorder, and my sister would be a willing and sometimes unwilling participant. We're going to do this, and we're going to go down the stairs on this inflatable dinghy, and we're going to film it, and and I loved that, and I loved puppets. Oddly enough, I was a huge Jim Henson fan.
Oh, I was going to mention that. Yeah, Jim Henson. Obviously, that's the legendary.
Yeah. And I didn't really think about being an actor. It didn't seem like a possibility to me, and it wasn't a rebellion in the sense that my parents never pushed me or my sister into anything. They're both journalists. Both wrote for the national newspaper.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
News journalists. My mom is a news journalist. My dad's a sports journalist, and they never tried to push us into that, but I knew I didn't really want to do that, what I was going to do, but I was pretty directionless, and I just, when I got to college, I picked something to study that I thought would be cool and interesting, but I didn't apply myself, and I was kind of drifting, and then I auditioned for a short film because I met a friend of mine at the bus stop. That friend is a successful actor now and still doing it at a very high level, and he was going for an audition, and I was like, oh, I'll come watch that. That sounds like it. That sounds like fun. And so we went over to this audition. And
come watch that. It's not like there's a public show, but
exactly.
That's how little you knew.
But I just went over with him because he was my buddy, and he grew up around the corner from me, and we played football together. And he at that point had started auditioning for stuff. He went to art college, and then he was also getting into acting. So I went over not really knowing what to expect, and to come in you had to sign up, and I was like, yeah, okay, sign me up then. I'll audition for this thing. Not even knowing what that meant. And then I got a script, and then I went in and I did this audition, and I had a blast, and I got a part, and so did he, thank God, because that would have been a blow. Yeah. I was like, yeah, I'll go with you. He got a part. His girlfriend at the time got a part.
Wow.
So all of us got to work on this short film, shot on 16 millimeter film.
You're kidding.
Overnight in a video store.
Wow.
In Dublin. And it was the best experience. I thought, I want to do this forever. This is what I want to do. And that was it. It just, as soon as I did it, I was like, yep, all right, that's it now. I'm just going to do this. I'm going to chase this. And
then that was a great first experience.
Absolutely amazing. And then I went to class, started doing classes part-time, and I started working a bit. I started working in theater, and then just kind of built it from there. And then that's how it started for me. It was just out of a kind of a lack of knowing what the hell I wanted to do with my life, and just the feeling of and finding something that was just like surfing on air, where I was like, oh, this is great.
Wow,
and I
you
was
got the
terrible
buzz.
at it.
You got the
I
buzz.
was bad at the time,
Uh-huh.
looking back, and, probably bad for quite a while, but I was doing classes and I was getting work, and I was, I did my first professional play when I was like 20, I think. And
Wow.
so it was great. And it just kind of went from there. And I have chased this thing through my life around the world, and I just love it. When I'm working, I'm like, I can't believe I'm getting paid for this. Like, there's still a kind of a disbelief in me that anybody would pay to, to do this. And I'm like, this is amazing.
Exactly.
And I was listening to something yesterday. It was an audiobook, but it made it referenced an experiment where there was two groups, and one group was told, it was photography, and one group was told that they would be graded on the quality of their work, and one group was told they would be graded on the quantity of their work. Yeah. Have you heard this?
I've heard of studies like this. Yeah.
So, after the period or whatever, the group that was being graded on quality came up with one picture that wasn't great. You know what I mean? That because they had been so concerned with getting it right. And the group that was graded on quantity produced so many great photos because they had just been trying something over and over again. So reps are what get you there. It's not worrying about trying to get something right. And it's kind of like an expanded version of don't let the great be the enemy of the good, or whatever. You know what I mean?
Right. And also being too precious about perfecting something.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I actually never heard of that study in terms of photography.
Yeah.
I heard of it in terms of sculpting a pot.
Interesting. But it's great. And it's a great lesson for me in like letting go of perfection, because I'll get caught up in that. And I'll be like, this has to be right, and not just try something. Back to taking risks. Try something.
I'm glad you brought it back there, because I was going to say something that's always been kind of weighing on me, this back and forth of, it's very easy to be cynical. Sure. It's always easy to be cynical, whether you're talking about art or not, but especially when you're talking in the industry of creativity and art. It's easy to sit back and do nothing, sit on your ass, criticize everyone, and not make a freaking thing.
Yeah.
That's the 99% who's just doing nothing. And I want to be the 1% who's actually not.
You are, but you are one of them. You know what I mean? I see the videos that you put out. I see the stuff that you do, and it's great.
Thanks,
really,
man.
really good stuff. And people do notice that. But again, it's about just throwing stuff out there.
Yeah.
And you're dead right. It's very easy to sit back and like, it's a very, because it can feel like you can feel superior in that moment. You know what I mean? You can get a little hit of like self-satisfaction and superiority. Like, that line in The Simpsons where Homer goes, Homer, it's easy to criticize. And he goes, fun too. Like,
wait. Oh, in Simpsons?
yeah. But it's so empty and fearful and hollow. If that's all you're doing, if you're just sitting there knocking people down. I had an experience recently with someone, an actor who's never really done anything, knock down and say out straight out, shoot down various different classes, shoot down people's, he's not talented. I was like, oh God, or I don't want to be on one of those shows. And I was like, you would be so lucky to be on one of those shows. One of them was a show I have been on, and I was like, well, let me tell you, they are the nicest group of people who are just doing it, and you're never going to get there if that's your attitude.
That's a great point. A great quote, and I wonder, to be honest, I'm probably getting this from Alex Hormozy, who's huge online, but cynics are right, but optimists are rich. Cynics are always right.
Yeah.
And that's why they get off on it.
Yeah.
They're right until they're wrong. They have no problem sitting back because they're, for the most part, always right.
Yeah.
But it's the optimists who take a chance who hit it.
Yeah. It's like there's a saying in recovery that's, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy?
Wow.
Which is very powerful for me because like sometimes I'll get caught up in the self-righteous kind of, I want to be right and I want to show you that I'm right. But it's rarely worth the fight. You know what I mean?
That's a great one.
It's often a losing battle. So I have to remember that at times, that there are things that I just have to let go of. And it reminds me to focus on, optimism and being happy. Because I want to be happy. Because I like how it feels.
Right.
You know what I mean? How do we get onto that? We got onto the origins of acting.
So we were talking about the idea of people still taking risks. So today we're talking about table reads. An old actor friend reached out to me completely out of the blue. She's putting together projects. She's assisting production companies. And there is this fairly big actor creator, a feature that they're trying to get off the ground. They wanted to table read the script. A lot of big names in it. They brought me in. Table for 40, some execs, some agents. You see a bunch of actors that you recognize. You're at the table. You're the least famous person. You go into these experiences and you're like, I hope I don't shit the bed. This is a credit to Clash. I knew this from Leslie. For those unaware, we're talking about Leslie Kahn. I was fortunate enough to have a handful of roles that were very different from each other. Made strong, specific, very different choices and let it rip. And that was it. I was always going to have a little self-doubt where it's like showing up to do a one line on a TV show.
Yeah.
And you're not going to get a round of applause from the producers for your one line. You know what I mean?
You are going to overwork it in your head and go, the fridge is over there.
Exactly.
The fridge is over there. The fridge is over there.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I don't know what I was expecting, but, you know, there was self-doubt flooding in when it's over. You know what I mean?
Of course.
The other thing I will throw out is if someone, and this goes for on set or, you know, if a director doesn't give you a note, just assume that you did a great job and the director doesn't need to give you a note.
Yeah.
A couple of the writers said, you crushed that.
Amazing.
And it's one of those things where it's like, you fight these urges. If someone gives you a compliment, accept it. Assume that they're not lying to you because it's one of those things
Even
where
if they are.
If you're doing anything for a pat on the back or a good job from the director, it's going to be a long road.
And you're right about the compliment thing. Take those compliments. Because, especially as an Irish person, we have a tendency, or certainly I do, to kind of deflect and just go, these guys are... And it doesn't serve you. And it's also like, if you've ever worked in the service industry where someone tips you, and I've seen people refuse it. And I was told, never refuse a tip because they are offering you something and you think you're doing the noble and right thing, but they're like, I'm giving you a gift, take it. And you're like, oh, no, I couldn't. And then it just creates an awkwardness. Oh, thank you so much. You know what I mean? Just say thank you so much. Mm-hmm. Brilliant. You just don't have to shoot yourself down in the process.
100%.
I did it one time to a casting director, and I really regretted it because I was so... it was about an audition, and this casting director had sent me this audition, and I in my mind, I didn't do a great job. And they said, I loved your audition. I was like, oh, it wasn't great. And they were like, no, it was good. And I was like, oh.
Wow.
Which, because I didn't feel confident in it. But I was then discounting their experience. And they see a lot of actors, and and I'm then negating their wealth of knowledge, and they're giving me a compliment, and I'm shooting myself down.
Yeah.
Afterwards I was like, oh, I'm never going to do that again. And to bring it back to table reads, I learned, a couple of lessons from some recent ones. One of the table reads I did recently was asked through a friend of mine to go up and table read the script with a bunch of really great actors and him. And it was again a lesson in like watching people just bring it, like everything to this table read, where you can kind of, or I have, at times assumed that people go in just in a more casual, because it's a slightly more casual setting and there's not the same stakes that you go in, but absolutely not. Like I was watching these actors crush it and just go for it. And the script had a lot of like colorful language. I was playing a racist character, and to break the tension at the start, as we were going around the table, I had to like say, my name's Rían, I'll be playing this two racists in this. And that got a laugh. But like there was like some language which I wasn't entirely comfortable using. But, thankfully the other actors were like, no, you need to go for it. And they just made that okay. And like they made that atmosphere so well.
Wait, you guys had a conversation before
we did, because I was like one of maybe 2 or 3 white actors at this, in this table read, and we're like, you've all these great actors, and you're worried about saying some of these words, and they're like, no, you have to go for it. That's the script, and you have to do it. And they just made sure that everybody was comfortable with it. So it created this really, a warm atmosphere of collaboration and playfulness, and like bring everything to this thing, because we can't have anybody. It's like. There's one of our national sports in Ireland is hurling, which is like lacrosse without the net on the end of it. It's a stick, you know what I mean? And if you don't commit fully to a tackle, you see these players go in and smash each other with these wooden sticks. They have to go in and hit this small leather ball, and they collide.
Oh my God.
Very, very. Oh, it's a crazy sport. If you haven't seen it, it's well worth looking up. But it's one of our national sports. But the theory of it is, and I was told always in this, that you have to go in 100%, because the closer you get to someone's body, the less chance there is of that stick swinging up and hitting you in the face, or, you have to get right in. So you have to commit 100% to every tackle. Same in every sport I've ever played, rugby, soccer, you have to commit to the tackle, because if you hesitate or hold back, that's when you get hurt.
You're tackling each other, but holding sticks. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, it's hard to describe that, actually.
Is it kind of like field hockey? In America, they had field hockey.
But it's way more...
intense. Because
way more
field hockey,
physical,
they don't tackle each
other. Way
other.
more physical. Yeah. But similar, yeah. Mm-hmm. And then my other table read experience was for, and I learned a lot from this one, was for a show that I'd been cast in a small role. And I got through the table read and then was told the next day that my part had been cut and I didn't get to do this show. And I was devastated. I just say that this, I don't think, and from talking to enough people around this, I don't think it had nothing to do with me. To the best of my knowledge, I won't know until I see it for sure, but I wasn't replaced. They just changed to the direction. They changed directors of the episode.
They changed the directors?
Yeah. So the director that actually had auditioned me and cast me in it was no longer the director of this particular episode. But I was just thrilled to be a part of it. Yeah. And I'm still, looking back now, I'm still thrilled to have gotten a yes and to being a part of that table read. Yeah. And, I have nothing but warm feelings towards that show. Initially, I was like, oh my God, I messed up and I did something wrong, which wasn't the case, but it was very hard not to take it personally. But what I do know is that I went into the table read on Zoom with the idea in my head that people get fired at table reads, and I went in with a degree of fear. Now, I don't think you could tell that from my performance. Like, I did what I had done in the audition.
Is there a reason why that fear went into your head? Like, you were conscious of it? Because it never happened before.
It was strong enough that, like, when I did book the role, I was conscious of the fact in my head when I was talking about it, to people. I didn't tell anybody outside my very close circle about it. I kept adding a caveat to it. Yeah, no, it'd be great, if it happens or whatever. There was something off about it. I knew the energy around it was something weird. There's something different about this. This particular show. And it wasn't anything to do with the show or anything anybody said, but going into that particular table read. And so I had lunch with an actor friend of mine that day before the table read, and I had said it to him. He's a pretty successful actor and he's done a lot of work, and he saw it happen at a table read. It didn't happen to him, but he saw somebody get fired at a table read for a show. I was like, wow. So this was all swimming around in my head.
Okay, now it's making sense. It's like you're about to go on stage with the performance of your life, and then someone's like, hey, do you hear about so and so? Yeah. That was rough. That fear wouldn't have been in your head if you didn't have that conversation.
Possibly not.
Okay.
I think they just changed the episode because just something for them wasn't working.
Yeah.
Or it could have been me. And even if it was me, even if they went, oh, that was a mistake. Okay. Yeah. That's they get to do that. You know what I mean? Rían Johnson, I was listening to, an episode of a podcast yesterday, and Rían Johnson talked about it. He's like, he had to fire somebody that he cast, and he felt awful about it. And he's like, it wasn't anything to do with them. It was my fault. I cast the wrong person.
Wow.
And I felt terrible. It derailed me for a month or two. It really did. Like, it forced me to look at things, and, I can't be that fragile in an industry that, like, is not personal. You know what I mean? It's not personal, and you're going to get disappointments.
And it's interesting now that we talk about table reads. The only table read that I actually physically did, I did a very long running show. This show has been on for, at that point, 19 seasons. These top level stars, series regulars, showed up to the table read. They did their thing. They very well could have been very conversational, talking about, it's like, it's an NCIS. So you get an idea what the show is.
Yeah.
Not gonna lie. Now that I'm thinking about it and hearing what we're talking about, I have a scene with, I'm a trust fund kid with my father. There's a moment where I'm having this, climactic scene with my father. I did my part and I let it rip. I let it rip yelling at my dad. He's sitting right next to me. Kind of let it rip. I let it rip. And
this was the one you booked?
Yeah. I this is booked. And then they're like, hey, you're on set. We're doing a table read. You want to come to the table read? I was like, hey, great experience. Yeah. And I get to see all the stars, and it was like, it's a good time. And 19 seasons, okay? And then here's the guy who, has this role. And it's one of those things, when I say read the room, there's also, there's old Hollywood stories. Don't speak louder than the lead. I know. So there's something like, if you're acting alongside Tom Hanks, you don't overpower Tom Hanks.
Yeah.
That's what I heard, right? Anyway, and I let it rip, right?
Interesting.
And everything's fine. And afterwards, the director goes, you could take it easy. Take it easy. Take it down. And this is she didn't have a lot of episodes under her belt, but she was with the show for a while. Very understanding.
Yeah.
But she's like, maybe, you could take it down a little bit. And I only until having this conversation now do I realize, if she didn't say that to me, I probably wouldn't have second guessed my performance.
Yeah.
And I didn't have any problem shooting it.
Yeah.
But it's just thinking about it now with all the spectrum of different table read experiences.
Yeah.
We go on some and they're letting it rip. And then you go on this. Series regulars are seasoned professionals. This is what they do every week, this table read. And they're not going to freaking blow their gasket.
Nope.
And then they got the freaking day player over here just, acting a storm up.
Yeah.
Now that I look back on it, I was like,
that's interesting.
You really can read the room. I didn't think that they were going to fire me. It's just funny looking back on. That was years ago.
That's fascinating.
That was years ago.
Yeah. Because, and similarly with this, this show is not in its first season either. I'm watching the series regulars and how some of them showed up and some of them went for it and some of them were more relaxed about it. And just to go back to another point, they asked you, do you want to come to the table read? I also got asked, are you available for the table read? So of course it crossed my mind after. I was like, what if I hadn't shown up for that table read? Would I have still been cut? But I can't even imagine how I would have felt had I not shown up and been cut. I would have felt like that was the reason. They're like, who is this joker? Like, I would have, I think he doesn't have to come to our table read, this co-star. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true. And then on top of it, it's on Zoom where it's like, you're so busy.
Yeah.
You couldn't show up to a Zoom table read.
Yeah. You better be stuck in quicksand, hanging onto a vine, my friend. They give you the option, you know what I mean? Like,
don't have any regrets.
No. Good for you though for going for it. There are a lot of lessons to be learned from just those three experiences. That's a good place to leave it.
Yeah. Well, this is a good first run out there.
Yeah, this is the Wright brothers' first test flight. We got a foot and a half off the ground and then landed back, and one of the wheels fell off. But I think we're off to a good start.
No one's done this before, people. All right, as always, subscribe wherever you find your podcast. We're on YouTube, Substack, at Actors Guide Podcast, and make sure you follow us on all social media at Actors Guide Podcast. Thanks, everyone. See you next week.
All right.